Kindergarten Daf Mesechtes Bava Kama Daf Mem Gimel. We're on the bottom of Mem Beis, 3 lines up in the bottom of the Amud. We're in the middle of a Gemara's discussion regarding the payment of the nizakin for a woman, where the Gemara brought a brisa because we were discussing that parsha. So we brought the Hemis Isha Isha. So Kiva said, "What's this coming to teach us?" It's coming to teach us that just like by a man, his nizakim go to his yarshim, so too by a woman, her the damages go to her yarshim. So on that, the Gemara is going to continue explaining. Although we find somewhere that by kaifer, we find that it's he explains that the halacha was said by kaifer. By kaifer, since it's not mishtam only lachamisa, so that's row, and therefore the husband's not going to take it. But by nizakin, you're right, the husband would take it. And that's what the Gemara is going to ask and say, hey, we see actually by nizakin also that it doesn't go to the husband. Shis goes by Kalzach and the Cheskel, today's daf, throughout the entire world. So we discuss in today's daf are Machlekes Rav Shlokish and Rabbi Yochanan regarding a shiur shehimis as a ebed shaloi b'kavan. If an ox kills a slave without intent, what's significant about that is that when he kills him without intent, the ox doesn't get killed. So then the owner is going to be put from the shleishim shkolim, that is the liability when the ox kills a slave. Another machlekes, Rabbi Yochanan, similar type of machlekes, is shor shehimis ben chayrin shle b'kavan. If the ox killed a free person without intent, also if you put from kaifer, which is generally the liability when the ox kills a person, but again with shle b'kavan, the ox is not going to be stoned, so that's going to be the machlekes. Regarding hemis shayres pliny, if someone admits, he says, hey, my ox killed a person, or shayres pliny, the ox of that person. So Allah is harizim mishalma piatzmai. He pays based on his own admission because that's mishalma memoina piatzmai. You could create a liability. You could be liable. But if he says, hey, misharias avdei pliny, if he says my ox killed the slave of that person, in mishalma piatzmai, he would not pay based on his own admission because in mishalma kanas piatzmai. The halacha of 30 shkalim of the Ebed is a biblical knas, and therefore you're not going to pay based on admission. And the Gemara ends off that there is no kaifer for Eish, that even though one would, if one has one's ox killing a person, he's chayiv for Eish, for a kaifer, so would you say the same thing would apply by Eish? It's also your mammon and the killing a person, would there be kaifer there too? So we begin the current daf, first finishing off a conversation from the previous daf on the bottom of Membeis, 3 lines down, up from the bottom of the Yamin, where the Gemara had qualified Rabbi Kiva's teaching that it says Vehemis Isha Isha, we're comparing a woman to a man. It's saying just like a man when he's a victim of a crime, when he dies, the inheritance includes his damage money. So to a woman, it goes to her inheritance and not to the husband. The Gemara says, what do you mean? I thought it says in the pasuk, talks about she'erai. She'erai is that the husband inherits his wife. So he said, yeah. But there's an exception, and it's kaifer that the husband doesn't get because that only comes after she's dead, and he only inherits what she had when she was alive. Says the Gemara, but by damages, Rabbi Kiva didn't say that we also there exclude the husband and that it's going to go to our inheritors and not to him, and it's only by kaifer you're saying that when she's killed by an ox. In the brisa it says if someone injures a woman and she miscarries the baby that she's carrying. So noisin nezek b'tzar leisha, you give the damages and the pain to the woman. Utmei v'ladis labal, but the monetary value of the aborted fetuses that goes to the husband because the Torah explicitly merits it to him because it says in the pasuk of bala isha, it goes to the man of the woman. Okay, continues the brayse. In a baal, if let's say there's no husband, noisin liyarshab, you give it to his inheritors. In the isha, if there's no woman. So what do you do with the nezek that we said goes to the woman? Noisen leyarsheha. You give it to her inheritors. What? Yeah. You give it to her inheritors, the nezek and the tsar. That's the main point of the Gemara right now. That's the question. You told me that by kaifer is the one place that is not going to the husband. But regular damages do. You see clearly from this brisa that even nezek and tsar that goes to the woman when she's not around, it goes to her inheritors. And continues the brayse. So he says, Shifcha v'nishtachara. If she was a maidservant and if she was freed, in other words, if she was freed and she was pregnant from a freed slave, oh yes, she was a female convert that was impregnated from a ger, and they both died. So Zacha, the perpetrator is exempt from all liability because he's first. Meaning, since these either freed slaves or Geyerim don't have inheritors because they have no Jewish relatives, so whoever comes first to snatch it has the rights. So this guy who's the perpetrator, who's holding on to the money, he's before everyone else. So Rashi explains that if it was a Jewish woman pregnant from a Jewish man, even if they didn't have children, they have Yershim to inherit her portion, and there's Yershim to inherit his portion. Every Jew has a relative going back to the Avos. Now, it's Dafka, moreover, points out Rashi that if she was freed before the injury, but if she was a maidservant when the perpetrator injured this pregnant woman, he'd be liable for all liability, even for the Dmei Vladis, and he would have to give it to her master, because the monetary value of the fetuses of a maidservant goes to her master, where it's not really to her husband, it's to her master. Like the Gemara says later on, Daf Mem Tesam Aleph, because the owner of the maidservant could tell the perpetrator, a pregnant donkey you damaged from me. Meaning it's his he owns this, it's his cattle. And therefore it's specifically talking about where she was freed before the injury, and it's also where the husbands are also giyarim or freed slaves, where again they have no relatives, they were from non-Jewish families of origin. Okay, but again the main thing we wanted was that you see that even by nizakin, it's not going to the husband. You told me it's only kaifer, that's an exclusion. So Merabi says no, because he would talk about begrusha, talking about that a divorcee, and that's why you give it to her inheritors, because she was divorced after the injury. You're right. Normally you would give it to the husband. You're not giving it to the husband because there is no husband. She's divorced. And Rav Nachman, he says begrusha, we're talking about by divorcee, but if she wasn't divorced, we would give it to the husband. Says the Gemara, wait, they asked, what do you mean? Even a gerusha, if she's divorced, nami tiflik b'dmei vladis. So then, how do you understand? You told me that the fetus that goes to the husband. So the question is, as Tais explains the Gemara's question, the Gemara assumes that when we say in the Torah it goes to Bali Isha, it goes to the husband of the woman. That's only when she's married to him. When divorced, so then they should be like partners. Then she should also get 50% of the miscarried fetus. It's not Bali Isha anymore. So why is it that he's getting the whole thing? If you're telling me that it's talking about where she's divorced, you told me that the nizak can go to her inheritors. You tell me that the miscarried fetuses go to his inheritors. Why? Why doesn't she get 50%? Says the Gemara, my Papa, he says no, because the Torah zachs that mei vladis labal. The Torah merits the monetary value of the aborted fetuses to the husband. A filabol is not even a husband. Even if they were never married at all, the one who seminated, that is the one who gets, and therefore even if they're divorced, he's going to get the monetary value of the aborted fetus of this woman, this single divorced woman. Those monetary value is going to go to him. Says, well, my time, what's the reason? On my krok as a pasuk. It says, Kashayash is a love, Bala Isha, like it's going to be assessed on the perpetrator by the Baal of the woman, where you see that the Torah is particular about Be'ila, about the one who went and had Bia with her, which Taisus brings an interesting question from Rabbi Kiva in the Yerushalmi. If someone's Baal Imoy, someone has a relation with his mother or a sister, you would think that also there we would go based on the one who seminated. That's why I say Baal has to be someone that's fit to be a Baal. That excludes these people which are not fit to be a Baal. But upon him, it's the one that's Baal. He's the one that gets it, even though they're divorced. Okay, but now the Gemara asks, okay, a little bit technical point. Why did Rabbah and Rav Nachman have to explain to resolve the brisa? Because remember, we had said on the previous daf that Rabbi Kiva, when he's saying that the nizakim go to the woman's inheritors and it doesn't go to the husband, we said, what do you mean? The Torah says that a husband inherits his wife. So I said, oh, that's only by kaifer. So the Gemara was asking, what do you mean? But you have a brisa that says that it's even by regular nezek. So he said, no. Regular nezek, of course, we go to the husband. It's talking about where she's a grusha. The Gemara is bothered. Why did Rabbi and Rav Nachman, who were the top line of Aram Ahmed, explain to resolve the brisa, say to by a grusha, and that's why it's going to go to our inheritors? Why couldn't they each say, according to their opinions, that it's mentioned in Bava Basra and Perak Yesh Neichlin? What is that? So the Gemara explains. The Nukma Rabba, why couldn't Rabba explain Kegoin Shagavu, where the courts had collected mo'is money from the perpetrator when he was paying the damages and the pain. Now, even though it was owed to her when she was still alive, but that's not any better than a milva b'shtar when a recorded loan document, where, as we're going to explain in a moment, Ulder of Nachman, you would explain it the other way. Karka, where the courts had collected real estate. What's the significance of this? So the Gemara explains, because I'm a rabbi, this is a Gemara discussion about Basa, of Kof Chav Dalet and Kof Ayin Hey. Rabbi says like this: Gavu, if the Yarshin inherit, if they collect karka for a loan that their father had lent, Yeshloi, the Bechar, the firstborn, gets a double portion. Why? The question is, it shouldn't be. There's halacha that a Bechar, a firstborn, only gets what the father has muchzik, what he's in possession of at the time of his death. If it's something that's if it's something that's owed, let's say, it's going to come 3 months after he passed away, firstborn does not get a right to say, hey, I get a double portion of this. But what Rab is telling us is that when the father had lent money and they collect money, that's like the father was in possession of that when the father died. Meaning when he collects karka. Why karka? Not money. This is the way Rab holds. Because karka is meshubed. There's a lien on it. It's like the father already collected it when he was still alive. So although they didn't actually technically go and repossess the property until, let's say, 3 months after he passed away, when they collect karka, he's going to get a double portion. Now, Gava Mois, on the other hand, ein loy. If they collected money, the firstborn does not get a double portion. Why? Because these are not the monies that the father left over. This is row. This is what was potential for him to collect, but it wasn't in the father's possession when he passed away. He's not going to get. Rav Nachman says the exact opposite. He says no. Gavu Mois, if the Yarshim collect, let's say, a few months after the father passed away, monies from a borrower that owes the father money, yeshloi. The firstborn does get a double portion. Why? Because that is like he was muhsik, because the father lent money, now they're taking money. This is the money. Now, obviously, it's not the same exact money. But it's the same thing. It was what their fathers had. But if they collected real estate, then the firstborn does not get a double portion. Why? Because the father didn't leave over property. This was never the father's property. This is row. So again, each one says the inverse of the other one. But the main thing the Gemara is asking is, so here also, why didn't Rav Nachman explain? We were talking about where the courts collected real estate for the damages that his wife suffered, which is row. That's why he's not going to get it. Because the husband doesn't get row. He only gets what was, meaning just like we said by kaifer. Why do we say the husband doesn't get kaifer? Because, that's not something she has michayim. It's only row. So why didn't each one of them explain, like the way they say in Baba Basra, that you don't have to say by Tumah by Grusha? Why don't you just say that this is something that is either one or the other, either it's karka or it's mais, and each one of them hold that that's not considered something that is fit for the husband to collect, even though it's michayim. In other words, the problem is it's not like kofer. Kofer is only obligated after death. Here, this is not obligated after death, but says the Gemara. But that's the point. The point is when you collect it, what do you say that it was already something like the way Rashi said before in the Masal Benukba? It says even though it's nischayv l'mechayim, but it's not better than milv b'shtar. By milv b'shtar, which alone that documented and it's owed money, it's owed. But we see that when the Yarshim collect and the husband has the same halacha like the Bechor, that he only gets muchzig, not row. So we find this machlokes already previously that Rabbi and Rav Nachman have in Bava Basra, and these same Rabbi and Rav Nachman are saying, oh, it's a grusha. Well, you couldn't find a better teretz? Why can't you say that she died, but the halacha depends on if it's karka that was collected or mais, and that would make the difference if you consider that as row or muchzig. So they said no. Hanamila, when did we say that you have machlokes Rabbi and Nachman and Bava Basra and Perak Yishnochlin? That's Lebnei Marava. That's for those of the West. In Eretz Yisrael, they sent the question. They wanted to know a firstborn that takes a double portion by a loan, but not from the interest. And we explain that Aliba de Rabbanan, that they were going like the Rabbanan who disagree with Rebbe, that says that the firstborn does not take a double portion by an increase in value that the assets had after the father's death. Because if you'd be going like Rebbe, then even by the interest, also he says you take a double portion because it's a automatic increase. In other words, not like what the Yerusha made it more profitable. It automatically went up in value. That Rebbe holds that you get a double portion. So Rabba and Rav Nachman were explaining to the Bnei Marava, according to the Rabbanan that hold that a firstborn takes a double portion by a loan, meaning by something that's like in possession. That's what Rav Nachman had said. Oh, that's only when you collect money. Oh, and that's what Rabba had said, that when you collect real estate. But Kikar Mihacha, says the Gemara, when did Rabba and Nachman both say that we're talking about a grusha and they didn't explain it like they said in Bava Basra? Because they're going Kirebi that says a firstborn does take a double portion even by shmach, even by something that goes up in value after the father's death. You are like you were muhsik in that, even though it hadn't gone up in value yet. Oh, for sure by a loan, which is like as if you collected it already. Oh, that wouldn't make a difference if you collected real estate or collected money. Oh, so therefore, if they had not gotten divorced, the husband would have taken it because the husband is like the firstborn and it would be considered like it is a muhsik. So therefore, they couldn't talk about it where she died and he's collecting it, because then actually no one would disagree that he would collect no matter what the circumstances would be. However, Rashi points out, but by kaifer, even Rebbe agrees that is row, because since there's no liability at all when the woman's still alive, it would not be even like shivcha de b'meila where you could collect after the person's death, and therefore that's why we said over there that Rabbi Kiva holds that the husband cannot get it. But in general, by nizakin, he would get it. And that's what we're saying in our Gemara. Even according to Rabbi Rav Nachman, even if it's karka or it's ma'iz, which they disagree in Baba Basra, one yes, one not. No, here they would both agree that it would be. Never that to say they're specifically talking about a grusha, because again we're going here like Rebbe who holds shivcha de memelo. You do get it is considered like muhsik. There that when they say that one of the other is ra'u and you're not fit to get, that's according to Rabbanan, not according to Rebbe. Okay, that finishes the Gemara's discussion of the previous stuff. But the Gemara continues like in the theme of what we discussed of Rabbi Kiva on the previous daf. So the Gemara brings a teaching Amar B'Shum ben Lakish. It says shiur shehemes as a evet. If an ox kills a slave. Now, generally when the ox kills a slave, the Torah tells us you have to pay 30 shkalim to the owner of the slave. But if he does it shaloi b'kavana, without thought, meaning unintentionally, the owner of the ox is exempt from paying the liability of the 30 shkalim. Why? Shlomo says a pasuk in Shemais. It says Kesav shleishim shkal mitladina v'ashar yisakal. What does the pasuk say? It says, okay, the owner of the ox has to pay 30 shkalim to the owner of the eved, and the ox gets stoned. Ooh, so they're putting it together. Calls man shashar beskila, as long as the ox is being stoned to death, then the ban b'sham shleishim shkalim, then no one has to pay the 30 shkalim. Ein ashar beskila, if the ox is not being stoned to death, like Rashi says, a shor shlebe kavan is pots from skila, as the Mishnah teaches later on the next daf of Mem Daled and Aleph. If niskavan lahargas of aim, if it intended to kill an animal, kill the person, and so on and so forth, which the Gemara learns out on over there on the Amud Beis, that kemises bam kachmises hashar, which is just like when the owner only gets killed if he intended to kill this person, so to the shor only gets killed if he intended to kill the person. So here we did not intend to kill the slave, so he's not going to get stoned to death. Then the owner doesn't pay the shleishim shkalim because the pasuk is putting the two together, and then he's not being stoned to death, does not have to pay. A similar halacha, says the Gemara. Omar Rabba. Shor shehemes ben chayrin. Ox kills a free man, not a slave. Shaloi b'kavana, but again, unintentionally. Pater b'kaifer. So although we know the Torah tells us that when the ox kills a person, the owner of the ox has to pay, when it's a mood, has to pay kaifer. No, the owner is going to be exempt. Why? Because the pasuk says, the ox is going to be stoned to death. The owner is going to be killed, and again, that doesn't mean that because the next pasuk says, if there's atonement money, then he'll be able to pay his way out. That's redeeming himself. Now, but the teaching is as long as the ox is being stoned to death, then then the owner pays kaifer in the shebeskila. But over here, with the ox not being stoned to death because he did a shlei b'kavana, as we'll see on the next daf, in Baal Masham Kaifer, the owner does not pay kaifer. Now Rashi points out importantly that Rabbi Eliezer that said on Daf Mem Aleph and Beis that he said to Rabbi Kiva, look, and this is where this comes in because this is related to Rabbi Kiva over there. He said, my halacha to exempt a shor tam from kaifer was only where he intended to kill, let's say, an animal, and he killed a person, obviously, says Rashi, disagrees in this halacha. Because from the fact that we need a pasuk to exempt a tam that does it shloi b'kavana, and that's what we're saying with Bala Sharnaki, then the inference obviously that he holds that a mu'id did it shloi b'kavana, that yes, he would be potter from being killed, like the Mishnah says in the next daf, but you would be chayiv on kaifa. Because he's saying that the whole purpose is to teach you that by a tam, you're going to be potter, but by a mu'id, you'd be chayiv. Whereas Rabbah, who's saying that, no, whenever does shloi b'kavana, even by mu'id, is going to be potter from kaifer, he relies on the pasuk like we just said, and he explains the Mishnah on the next daf, like him, that when the Mishnah says potter, it means you potter from skila and from kaifer. Whereas according to Rabbi Eliezer, obviously you'd be chayiv on kaifer by a mu'id. But that's what Rashi just points out, and that's really where it comes back in from the prior daf. But these are two teachings that the Gemara says Eitzei Abaya. Abaya asks on this teaching from a Mishnah Masechtas Ksubas. Mishnah says that Hamis Sheichi is playing. If someone says that my ox killed that person, or the ox of that person, which, as Rashi points out, we explained this talking about by Mu'id, as we explained in the first paragraph of Tezvav Mabeis. But one thing we learned is that if a guy says my ox killed that person, the halacha is a mishalma pi atzmai. He pays based on his own admission. Wait a second. My love, kaifer. Isn't it what he's saying? What he's going to be liable for is kaifer, because that's what happens when your ox kills a person. Now, even though the ox is not going to be stoned to death, because how do you know this happened? This was through the admission of the owner. The Gemara says in the next daf that, as we just referenced before, kamisas abayim kachmisas ashar. The ox only gets executed the way the owner, the human being, would get executed. Now, when the person admits to murdering someone, he doesn't get executed. As the Mishnah teaches, Masechtas Makis Daf Hey, the Gemara teaches over there that it was only with two edim. So when he admits that his shiur did it, the ox not being stoned to death. And still you're saying...
You also have to know the intention. Because what happens if...
Yeah, so that's what he said. How do we know? You have to know how you know. But myself, if the ox... okay. It sounds like he's saying...
calculation.
Right, but I'm saying here it sounds like as if he's saying that my ox killed... It killed deliberately. I'm saying, no, killed deliberately. And therefore he's liable, meaning with intent. So he's liable to pay for... Or doesn't he make a difference? Not the owner. His ox killed a person. And the Mishnah teaches him Masechtas Ksubas. Someone says, my ox killed a person, so he has to pay based on his own admission. So the Gemara says, well, it doesn't make a difference how he killed him. He killed the person. He's always chayiv, and he has to pay. What is he paying? Isn't saying kaifer? What else is he paying? Right? Isn't that what happens when he kills a person? He pay kaifer. But the problem is, the ox not being stoned to death, because it's only based on the admission of the owner. Based on the admission of the owner, just like he wouldn't be killed that way, his ox also not killed that way. But didn't you, Rabbah, say that when the ox killed a free person, if he's not being stoned to death, then you're not going to pay kaifer? But it's contradicting Rabbah. Rabbah said that when the ox not stoned, then the owner doesn't pay kaifer. Here we see Mishnah Masechtas Ksubas that says that a guy could be liable for kaifer, even though his ox not being stoned, because it was only based on his own admission. So that contradicts Rabbah. Says the Gemara, no. Just that the Mishnah is teaching Mishalim, it's very interesting what the Gemara is going to tell us right now. It's not in the capacity of kaifer that we're saying that you're going to be liable. Actually, you don't need kaifer for atonement. Because even if you don't pay anything, for example, let's say a guy doesn't have any assets, so it's not in the category of an einish, because you're right, kaifer is only if the ox is being stoned to death. But where a guy has assets, he has to pay because of damim, because of the monetary value of the human that was killed. Like Rashi explains, interesting. He says death is no less than victimizing, than damaging a person. If your ox would have injured a person, so even though the ox not being stoned to death, of course you would have to pay for the deficiency of the value of that person, for his injuries that he suffered. So here also, what you're going to pay to his yarshim when you kill this person, you're right, it's not kaifer. Because kaifer is only when the ox is stoned to death. You'll have to pay damim, a monetary value. What's the loss of the person? If you got injured, you'd have to pay, right? If you're shur, you're aish, whatever it is, whatever you do that your money is damages a person, you're chayiv for the hezek. You're bar. Actually, not. Yeah, the damages of a person, not the death of a person. You have to pay. So your ox that killed a person, you're right, not kaifer, but damim. So it's like introducing a different term to create a liability for that we're saying that you have to pay based on your own self. So think about, wait a second, eat damim. Maybe you're talking about this new idea of money, not kaifer, ema seifa. So there was two cases.
But kaifer nefesh is a tax over damim, above and beyond.
Kaifer.
Instead
Good question.
Isn't it a tax?
A tax?
Yeah, in other words, damim is first, shavus of a person, and then you have to pay a knas.
Well, depends. If you say kaifer is the damim of the nizik, that's pretty interesting. How you gonna? This is really what Taisa says. Taisa, the master of my life, kaifer loydam. He says, according to the one that says kaifer is the dam. We had a machlekes on the previous daf. What is kaifer? Who's atonement? Who's nefesh? The master of the nizik. So Taisa says, if you hold that kaifer is the dam of the nizik, so what do you mean to say that is kaifer and this damim? It's the same thing. It's semantics. So you tell me apart from kaifer, chayv and damim. What does that mean? It sounds like usually when you kill him, there's only kaifer. That's what it sounds like. Right, but now the Gemara is saying, but now the Gemara is saying that you're. Yeah, but I'm saying, but the Gemara is saying now, you part from kaifer, oh, you'll be chayv dam. That's what it sounds like. When you kill him, usually kaifer. Okay, no kaifer dam. So Taisa wants to know. Wait a second. What is the difference between kaifer and dam? It's always a dam of the nezik. If you hold that, huh? No. It's two cases. One's a living person and one's an evid. The case we're about to ask from the case of the evid, but one of the cases in Mishnah Ksubas was hamish sheichi es plainly, a regular person. So he said you're going to have to pay based on your own admission. Wait a second, the ox is not getting killed. I thought kaifer Rabbi said is the pasuk says is I'll show you suckle and then gambal of yumas, which is in kaifer yashas. So kaifer is only if you kill it. Yeah. We're not talking about that you have to pay kaifer. It'd be dumb. So Taisus says, hello, kaifer is the dumb of the nizik. So Taisus has interesting. He says different answers how to answer that. Where if let's say the mazik dies, there's no kapar lachamisa, so you wouldn't have to pay kaifer, but dam you would have to pay. Or he says another pshat that nafkamin between dam and kaifer is that dam you could be meichel, kaifer can't be meichel. Whatever he has pshatim, but al kapanim. I'm saying you can be meichel a monetary liability, you can't be meichel a kapara. Kaifer is a kapara. Whoever. Yeah, obviously the Yarshim. Yeah, was killed. Yeah, obviously. So them they can be Michael. Kaifer can't be Michael. Upon them. So the idea the Gemara is answering is okay. We're not talking about Kaifer. We're talking about Dama. So the Gemara, wait, Idam ain't safe. Well, look at the end of it. It says the next case was, it says, Hamish is Abdish Aplaini. My ox killed the slave of that person. Then says the Mishnah, no. That you're not going to pay based on your own admission. Why not? Very simply because the shleishim of an eved is a knas. Because anytime you have a set amount in the Torah, that's a knas. Because it's not obviously the actual hezek, because it could be one salad, it could be 100 salam, why you give me 30? It's a knas. Okay. But says the Gemara, but the damim, as Rashi explains, in other words, if you're going to think to say that there is a halachic category of damages when you kill a person, so therefore, just like by a free person, you told me when there is no kaifer. That's what Rashi makes sound like clearly. It's only when there's no kaifer. Then you're going to pay damim. So a slave also, when there's no knas, there's actual monetary loss. Am I lying? Why are you saying that you're not going to have to pay based on your own admission? Why didn't you say the same shtickle teira? Okay, you're not getting the biblical tax, penalty, whatever you want to call it, kaifer, shleishim shalebed. The hezek. The guy is his shiur gets injured, you have to pay. His evid's no less than a shiur. So you're talking about damim, why don't you have to pay? So he says, it's cute the way he says it. He says, no. I could really answer you. Reisha damim. When it's talking about a free person, it's talking about monetary value, not kaifer. But sefer knas. The sefer, I could be telling you it's referring to knas. Meaning, you could answer that. It's referring to different things. But me, however, shenu dechika, a doichik teretz, explaining that it's about two different cases. I'm not going to give you such an answer. I'm going to take the high road here. I really could give you as eretz and say, yeah, this is Toma Damim, this is Toma Knas. But I'll tell you like this: Idvidi Dam. Right, most of them are talking about by a monetary liability, not the biblical knas of kaifer or of the shleishim shalevet. As we continue in base, but miu ben chayrin. Well, so what's the difference then? So it says them like this: a free person, we find the mishalem kaif apiatzmai. Meaning, I will tell you for the damim, you'll have to pay based on his own admission, because the biblical kaifer itself, you also could find he'll have to pay based on his own admission. Says, what do you mean? How could you pay kaifer based on your own admission? I thought you told me when you admit, then the ox doesn't get stoned, and then you don't have to pay kaifer, because Rabbi said that they're connected. He said, no, I'll explain to you. How is that possible? Because the iyasa sahadi, if witnesses come along, v'ashidu beid the katal, and they testify that this ox killed a person, but they don't know if it's a tam or a mu'id. What's the difference between tam or mu'id? The difference is regarding kaifer. And the master says, yeah, the mu'id, it's a mu'id. The mishalem kaifer al pi atzmoi. Here he would be paying kaifer based on his own admission. Why? Because over here, for sure he's going to pay kaifer, because kaifer is kapara. It's not a knas to say, that we're going to let you off the hook because you admit on your own. Now, when there's no edim at all, so when you admit you're going to be part from kaifer, that's exes akasa, because the ox is not going to be stoned to death because we only know it based on your admission. But over here, the ox is being stoned anyway because the witnesses are testifying, because even if it's a tam, an ox gets stoned to death. Oh, so that would be a case that you would be paying kaifer based on your own admission. So heichet deleka edim. So when there's a little bit of a complex technical point. But so therefore, when there's no witnesses at all, when you're not chayiv kaifer, like we said, but at least misham damim, at least in your own admission, you'll pay the monetary value. But gabi eved, by a slave, she'einim mishalim knas al pi atzmoi, that you're never going to be able to pay the 30 skullum based on your own admission. Because if you make the equivalency of regarding the same idea we tried to say by a free person, you'll try to say the same thing regarding a slave, like this. The asa edim, if let's say witnesses would come along, and they would testify that the ox killed the slave. But we don't know. Same exact case, the parallel. We don't know if it was a tam or mu'id. But the master says, mu'id, who was a mu'id. You wouldn't be paying the knas based on the owner's admission, meaning, even though the ox would be stoned to death, even though it's a tam, like we say later on, whatever you chayiv misa for a free person, you chayiv misa when it kills a slave too, but you would be moide b'knas, which is the shleishim shel eved, unlike kaifer, which is not a knas. Kaifer is a kapara, knas, by shleishim shel shkom, it's a knas, you'd be pater. So therefore, hechadeleka edim, when there's no witnesses at all, then even le mishalem damim, you're not going to pay even the monetary value. It's an interesting smart the Gemara is saying that making independent. The Gemara is saying that they're both from damim. So what's the difference? Difference is I could find you a case of kaifer that you'd pay the kaifer based on your own when there's witnesses, and therefore even when there's no witnesses and there's your own idea, at least you'll pay the damim on your own. Whereas by the eved, you'll never have a case that you'll pay based on your own admission because of moed b'knas. So therefore, when there's no edim and you are admitting, you're not going to be chayiv even for the damim. Therefore, it's no difficulty on Rabbah, who is trying to answer that the Bryce is talking about, Mishnah Ksubis is talking about damim, not kaifer, because how you can't be chayiv kaifer based on your own adab, because your ox not being stoned. You're right to my damim. But Masav Rav Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak, he asked on Rabbah from the following Bryce. The Bryce says that kol shechayiv b'ben chayr and chayiv be'eved. Whatever you're liable when it kills a free person, you're chayiv when it kills a slave. Bein b'koifer, bein b'misa, whether for the atonement money, whether for death. Says the Gemara, how do you even read this? Doesn't make sense. Koifer be'eved mi'ika? Do you even have koifer by a slave? No. Elolav, what's it talking about? It's talking about the damim. The value of the person that was killed. Obviously, we don't mean the biblical koifer. We're saying the damim, the monetary value. Okay. And Evet Ivri is a regular, doesn't have any different in halacha than a free person in that regard. That's a good question. Right, but doesn't own his body, right? Chayra would not be, Chayra would be the Evid's family. But be that as it may, the Brisa says whatever you chayiv by a free person, you chayiv by an Evid. Now, since you said it's like a little bit of a layered question, like Rashi's explained the Masech El Abdam. So since you said that a free person, based on his own admission, you would have to pay the damim, not the kaifer, the damim. So why are we saying by an Eved that he doesn't pay based on his own admission? I just brought you a brisa that whatever you're chayiv by a ben chayin, you're chayiv by an Eved. And you just established before when the guy admits to having killed a free person, you're chayiv the damim apiatzmoi. So then why does the Mishnah Ksuba say, if you're explaining with damim, that if you admit to the killing of the Eved, you're not going to pay based on apiatzmoi? I thought Eved did the same thing like a ben chayin. It's the same thing. So the Gemara says, Ikeda Amri, that those who say that it was Humoisav lo b'huma fa'akla, him, this Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, who asked the question, he was the one that gave an answer. Or Ikeda Amri, those who say no, it was Amalei Rabbi, the Rabbi responded. Rabbi was defending his opinion. The Hachikitani, that the way you have to interpret the Brisa, although it said the word kol, was not to say including the case of when the guy's moida piyatma that he admits on his own. That was not the kol. When we were saying every, didn't mean everything. It was saying regarding when there's a witness's testimony. Like general, when someone comes to court. When there's witness's testimony, you're right, there's nothing that would be chayiv by a free person that would not be chayiv by an Eved. And this is what the Bryce is saying. It's a very technical Gemara. Whatever is liable by a free person, bikavana, where the animal had done it deliberately. Al pi edim, with witnesses. And by a free person that you'd be chayiv kaifer. In other words, whatever case would be by a free person would make the owner of the ox liable for kaifer. For example, like we're saying, if it did it intentionally with witnesses, then chayiv be Eved. Then you would be chayiv by a slave. If it did it intentionally with witnesses' testimony, it'd be chayiv for kanas, for the 30 shkalim, because the ox is being stoned to death. Now, however, whatever is liable by a free person, shaloi bekavana al pi edim, meaning if it's without intent through witnesses' testimony, damim, meaning in that type of a case with witnesses, which again does not going to be kaifer because it's unintentional, and unintentional the ox doesn't get stoned to death, so then there's no kaifer, like Rabbi explained. So then you write chayiv be'eved, then you would be liable by a slave if it kills a slave, shaloi bekavana, unintentionally, al pi edim, with witnesses, damim, for monetary value. But that's only if there was witnesses, so then you'll be chayiv for the damim. But based on his own admission, even though by a free person you would have to pay the damim, because we said kaifer is kapara, and that you would be chayiv with your own admission, like we said the case on the top of the Amid, when you had witnesses who said we saw that it killed, we just didn't know if it's tam in the mood, and then you're admitting, and then you can be chayiv for the damim. But that's only by a ben chayin you would pay the damim, but by ever you'd be potter, like we said, because since we find there is a difference when you're admitting between kaifer of a ben chayin to the knas of an Eved. But by edim, when the animal did it shaloi b'kavana, we don't find any chumrah of kaifer more than knas, where both of them are potter. So therefore you're right, by damim, we'll say there's not going to be any difference between the two of them, they're going to be the same, and just like by ben chayin you'd be chayiv, so too by an Eved you'd be chayiv. But by haidas al pi atzmai, no, there we could say that they're going to have a different halacha. Okay, so we haven't refuted the interpretation of Rabbah of that Mishnah Ksubis that it should be difficult for his opinion. It could still be what he's saying is correct, that only when the animal gets stoned to death do we say that the owner is going to have to pay kaifer. Now, however, Amalei Rabbah says to Rabbah, he says, Ihachi, if that's the case, that you're saying that an ox unintentionally killed a person with witnesses' testimony, where the halacha is that the owner of the animal is not going to have to pay kaifer because the animal is not being stoned to death because it did it unintentionally. But the owner will have to pay the damim, the monetary value, because there is money for the death of a person when there's no kaifer and there's no knas. So then he has the following question. He says, if that's the case, then Ishai, his fire also, where there's no halach of kaifer, that we know, we've said this previously in the Masechta, that there's no kaifer for the mazik of eish. So then when that's done shaloi bekavana, unintentionally, al pi edim with witnesses' testimony, nesham damim. You should have to pay the monetary value of the dead person because there's halacha of damages. Now, as Rashi points out, if it was done bekavana, obviously you'd be patur because that's kamle b'rabne. If you deliberately torch the guy, of course you're going to be executed for having killed him. But when it was done shaloi bekavana, and there's witnesses, like we said, it's dependent on witnesses, just like we said the case of the Evan. So why don't you have the liability of damim, even though it cannot come to kaifer? But that's like what we said by the case of Evan. So why don't you have damim? So it says the Gemara, how does Rabbi know that you don't pay? He's asking a question. He's saying, oh, you should have to pay damim. Who said you don't? Maybe you do pay damim. You're right. A dead person has, when there's no kaifer, like by Eish, like a mazik Eish, there's no kaifer. Yeah, a guy dying is no less than his damages. Says the Gemara, if you think it's from the Mishnah of Samach Alpha Beis, the Mishnah later on tells us how you could eat kafas like. If there was a goat that was tied to a silo, a pile of grain, and the evet samachlei, and there was a slave nearby, maybe a guard, maybe whatever, this and that, he was just nearby. But this and he gets burnt with the pile of the grain. So chayiv, the owner of the fire is liable for the pile of the grain and for the goat, but he's putter for the slave because the slave should have ran away. But the goat was tied, and the pile of grain that is michayiv. Let's say the other way around. Let's say evet kafas. Let's say the slave was tied to the pile of the grain, and the goat was nearby, and he gets burnt with it. So pater. So he's going to be pater. Now Rashi explains that Rava understood that when it says pater, is going on the slave and the goat. Why? I mean, obviously the pile of grain you're going to be chayiv for, you burnt up the pile of grain. But the slave is because there's no tashlumen for an eved, only in the place when there's a knas of a shiur hamud. Meaning, what's the halacha of an eved? An eved is, when like we say, there's 30 shkalim that generally when you kill an eved. But that meaning if you would have had the halacha, when a shiur hamud kills the eved, you'd be chayiv for the knas of a shleishim shkalim. Oh, so that's where you're going to have the liability of one of your other mazikin damaging a slave. But over here, where it was shaloi b'kavana, where by the shiur we said you would not be chayiv, which means that's what we're saying all along in the Manav, so therefore your fire also would not be chayiv. But one thing we see is that you're totally pater, even from damim. Right? That's gonna be the question. But you see that, you see Eish is not chayiv for dam. That's what he's asking. Why not? Why aren't you chayiv for dam? You see, you're totally pater. Now, why you pater for the goat? Because it should have ran away. It wasn't tied down. Only the slave was tied down. Because as Rashi explains, because of kimle b'drabimnei, he didn't hold that would be an exemption because he holds ishay mishum amoinoi, not mishum chitzav. If fire is your money, not your arrow, so there's only a monetary liability. There's no chi of misa. So then why you pater on the eved? Pater because obviously it's just like the case of shiur hamud, where it wouldn't be chayiv for the knas because it did a shlei b'kavana. Okay, but what's with damim? At least be chayiv damim, based on what Rabbi was explaining the Mishnah Masechet Ksubis. Says, really? That's where he's coming. That's where his question is coming from. But Amr Rish Lakish says in Perek Ketzad, we're talking about hitzis beguf shel eved. That Mishnah of Samach Aleph is talking about where you actually lit up the body of the slave, where you actually getting a chi of misa, and therefore actually the patur is not only on the gedi and on the eved, it's even on the gadish also going to be patur because they come to be. So what are you asking from that Mishnah as if like, you see you're going to be patur from dam? Of course you're patur from everything. You're being executed for having killed the slave. So rather, what are you going to say? His question available in Mahad Tanya from the following brisa. Brisa says, there's a stringency of the mazik of eish over the mazik of bar, which is she'esh moedis lechal. The mazik of fire is considered prepared and ready to damage bein dava rola, bein dava she'ein rola. Whether it's something that's fit for fire to consume, or whether it's something that's not fit for something for fire to consume. Let's say it scorches his plowed field or it singes the stones. It's not really what you usually fuel a fire with, but Eish's maz is chai for all of them. Whereas by bar we know a bar is putter on things that are not row for it, like a kalim or adam, whatever. Now v'ilu, but she'esh mishalem. But there's a case that didn't mention, which the Gemara is asking. Maybe that's the source of what Rabbi's question was, because v'ilu she'esh mishalem mishaloi bekavana, to say that the mazik of fire pays when it damaged unintentionally. Where there's no kimle medrabimine when it kills a person because it was unintentional, and to say that it'll pay damim in the monetary value, mashen kimabar, which is not the case by a pit, which you're totally exempt when it kills a person, like it says shar in the Torah, which excludes adam. Loikatani doesn't say that. Why not? That could have been another difference between the chumrah of eish over shar of a bar, obviously because the mazik of eish doesn't pay damim. So the Gemara, how do you know that? Dimatan v'shayir. Maybe it just said, but it left over. It doesn't have to say every case. So the Gemara says, you're right. It's not like Rabbi had a question, like, so why don't we say that? Yitaka doesn't know. He's just El Rabba Gufa. No, Rabbi himself, this that he asked, what are you going to do with Ishai, his fire, Shalibik Havana? It wasn't because he knew definitively that you don't pay damim, and he's like refuting the teaching of Rabbi. No, he was asking. Rabbi was saying to Rabbi, if that's the case based on what you said, that sure Shalibik Havana, that there's no kaifer, but there's going to be damim, he wanted to know, what would you say by Isha Shalibik Havana? What would you say by the mazik of Eish without intention? Me, Mishal Damalai, would you pay money or not? What's the Gemara's question? So the Gemara says that do we say me Amrina Gabi Shoyhu by the ox? When the ox killed intentionally, then the owner has to pay kaifer. Okay, at least there Shalibik Havana Mishal Damim. So when you did it unintentionally, fine, you'll get the second rate payment, which will be the monetary value. But regarding the mazik of a person's fire, the bekavana, even if it did it intentionally, you're not going to pay kaifer. First of all, Rashi says there's no kaifer by Eish, and second of all, it's common ramani. When you do it intentionally, you're getting executed for having killed the guy. So maybe then you would say so when it's not, without unintentionally, they're not even going to pay the monetary value. Maybe you say no. Since you say by the mazik of shur, when it was unintentionally, avagav to like a kaifer, although there's no kaifer, mishamdam l'maisa, when it's shloibik havana, even though there's no kaifer, you're going to pay the monetary value. So gabi ishanam, you'll say by fire also. Avagav to bekavana l'misham kaifer, although you're right when it does it intentionally, there's no kaifer, but l'maisa shloibik havana mias mishamdam, it should pay at least monetary value when you do it unintentionally. But we don't know. Take a let it stand. That's the question, but he wasn't refuting him. He was just saying, based on what you're saying, that there could be damim when there's no kaifer. What would you say by the mazik of Eish when the shleibik havana? Would there be damim or not? Now, going back to what we said before, that we had mentioned two teachings. It's actually a machloikis. We had mentioned Rish Lakish and Rabba's teaching, and between a ben chayrin and an evet, this is actually a machloikis. And he says kaifer. It talks about kaifer in the Torah when the ox kills a free person. What's the pasuk teaching me when it says im kaifer? What's the extra im? That it includes a liability of when your ox kills a free person to pay atonement money, even when it was unintentionally. Like the liability of kaifer when they did it intentionally so although the ox is not being stoned, Rashi says explicitly that he's disagreeing with Rabbah. So that Abai says, if that's the case, what do you do with the case of a slave? Matam, what does the pasuk teach when it says im eved, that is gonna, if his ox is gonna gore a slave or a maidservant, you have to pay the 30 shkalim. So matam alayma im eved l'rabas eved shleibik havana. That's coming to include a slave that when it was killed without intent, keved b'kavan, like when the ox killed the slave with intent. How come you're going to say that's the case? But Vomer Shlokar says no. He says an ox that kills a slave without intent, you're exempt from Mishleshim Shkalim. So Amalei says, Gava Karamas? What are you asking one person, another person? You're right. Rabbi Yechanan disagrees on him too. He agrees on both the halachas. There's an imam both of them, and both of them is coming to say that bekavana, that shlei bekavana is like by kavana. So to Kiyasa Rav, and Rav came on Rabbi Yechanan says clearly Eved Matamalim im Eved. To include, you're right, that the knas of 30 shkalim for Eved when you did it without intent is ke'eved b'kavan. It's like a slave with kavan. So the Gemara says, Okay, Resh Lakish, Nami Nimish, shall we say Resh Lakish also will say, meaning from the fact that when the Eved, Im Eved Loy Darish, he doesn't expound Eved Im Eved, right? Because he holds by Eved, you're going to be Patish Lebekavana. Would we say that by default he holds like Rabbah? Kaifer Im Kaifer Nami Loy Darish, he also doesn't darshan Kaifer with the word Im Kaifer? On that, Amid the Gemara says, no, Loy, not necessarily. You could say Eved Im Eved Loy Darish, it doesn't darshan that you're right. Eved Shlei Bekavana, when you kill the slave without intent, you'll be Pater. But Kaifer Im Kaifer Darsh. But yeah, that Rosh actually would darshan like Rabbi Yechanan to include Shlei B'Kavana. Says Gemara Meisner, what's the difference? I'll tell you the difference. Interesting difference, says the Gemara. Because Eved Im Eved, that extra Im, like Kasev B'Makom Tashlumin, that's not written where the monetary liability is mentioned. It's written by the goring. Im Eved Yigach. So that's needed for the halach itself to differentiate between the slave and the free person. But if it's a slave, it's not going to be the kaifer, it's going to be just this 30 shkalim. But it's not coming to tell you anything regarding shalei b'kavana to be liable monetary payment. Whereas kaifer kaseh b'makam tashlumin, that's written in the place of the monetary payment. So that's logical. That's coming to include something else for a tashlumin, because for it itself you don't need it. It should have just written kaifer. What's im kaifer to tell you that you can be chayiv even shalei b'kavana, just like b'kavana. So Rish Lakish could be he holds a Rabbi Yechanan in that halach, and that he would disagree with Rabbi. Thank you to any time.
Okay, can you clarify, please, Dominic?